In the shadowy vaults of Yale University's Beinecke library rests an object that has confounded the world's brightest minds for 6 centuries. Neither ancient curse nor buried treasure, this mystery takes a more unassuming form, a leather-bound book of just 240 pages. Yet within these pages lies one of history's most enduring puzzles, the Voynich Manuscript. Picture a book where nothing makes sense. Strange plants that don't exist in nature. Women bathing in green liquid flowing through bizarre pipe systems. Stars arranged in patterns unknown to any astronomer, and binding it all together, line after line of elegant script that no human being has ever been able to read. For 600 years, this manuscript has whispered its secrets to deaf ears. Kings have owned it. Alchemists have studied it. World War codebreakers who cracked the most complex Nazi communications stared at these pages and admitted defeat. Even today's supercomputers and artificial intelligence systems have failed to make sense of its mysterious alphabet. What makes this mystery so compelling isn't just its resistance to solution. It's that the manuscript doesn't look like nonsense. It follows patterns that linguists recognize as hallmarks of genuine language, repeating words, consistent grammar structures, and organized information. The illustrations, though bizarre, show deliberate care. This isn't random scribbling. Someone created this book with purpose and meaning. The Voynich Manuscript doesn't just represent an unsolved code, it challenges our very understanding of human knowledge. How could something created by human hands remain so completely indecipherable to other humans? What secrets could be so valuable they needed to be hidden in a code no one could crack? Or is it perhaps the world's most elaborate medieval hoax, a phantom puzzle with no actual solution? This manuscript has become more than just an academic curiosity. It has captured our collective imagination, appearing in novels, video games, music and art. It represents the ultimate intellectual challenge, a siren call to puzzle solvers everywhere. The manuscript reminds us that despite our technological advances and accumulated knowledge, mysteries from the past can still leave us completely baffled. After centuries of failed attempts, one voice now rises above the chorus of confusion. Dr. Elena Marković, a computational linguist specializing in extinct European languages, has sent shockwaves through academic circles with an announcement that seems almost too good to be true. She claims to have cracked the Voynich code. Unlike previous attempts, Dr. Marković's approach combines traditional linguistic analysis with cutting-edge machine learning algorithms designed specifically to recognize patterns in unknown scripts. After 7 years of painstaking work, she revealed her findings at the International Cryptographic History Symposium, findings that have divided the academic world overnight. The manuscript isn't written in code at all, Dr. Marković explained to a stunned audience. It's written in a previously undocumented proto-Romance language using a unique writing system developed by educated women for sharing medical and botanical knowledge away from the prying eyes of church authorities. News outlets worldwide seized on the story. 600-year-old mystery finally solved, declared headlines across the internet. Social media exploded with debate. Overnight, the Voynich manuscript transformed from an obscure academic curiosity into a trending topic, with millions viewing images of its strange pages for the first time. But not everyone is convinced. Dr. Richard Whitfield, cryptographer at Cambridge University and leading Voynich skeptic, dismissed the claims as wishful thinking dressed up as scholarship. Meanwhile, Yale University reports that requests to view the manuscript in person have increased tenfold since Dr. Marković's announcement. What makes this claim different from dozens that came before. Is this truly the breakthrough that will finally unravel a 600-year-old mystery? Or is it simply the latest chapter in the manuscript's long history of dashed hopes and false solutions? To understand the significance of this potential breakthrough, we must first journey back through time to the manuscript's origins and explore the many hands it passed through on its way to becoming history's most enigmatic book. The story of how the Voynich Manuscript emerged from the shadows of history is nearly as mysterious as the document itself. Our tale begins not in medieval times when the manuscript was created, but in 1912, when an ambitious Polish book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich made a discovery that would forever link his name to one of history's greatest unsolved puzzles. Voynich was no ordinary bookseller. A former revolutionary who had escaped from Siberian exile, he had reinvented himself as an antiquarian book dealer with a talent for uncovering rare treasures. On a buying trip to Villa Mondragone, a Jesuit college near Rome, Voynich found himself examining a collection of ancient manuscripts stored in wooden chests. Among them was a strange volume with peculiar illustrations and indecipherable text that immediately captured his attention. The manuscript had no title, no author's name, and no date. It was as if it had materialized from thin air. Voynich immediately recognized its extraordinary nature and purchased it along with about 30 other manuscripts from the Jesuits, who were quietly selling some of their treasures to fund renovations of their college. What Voynich didn't know then was that this mysterious book had once been in the possession of one of history's most eccentric figures, Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II of Habsburg. Ruling from Prague in the late 16th century, Rudolf's court was a haven for astronomers, alchemists, and occultists. Historical records suggest that around 1586, Rudolf purchased the manuscript for the astronomical sum of 600 gold ducats, equivalent to tens of thousands of dollars today, believing it to be the work of the 13th century philosopher Roger Bacon. But how did Rudolf acquire it? Letters discovered years later revealed that an unknown messenger brought the manuscript to Prague, seeking to sell this strange book to the emperor known for his obsession with the mystical and arcane. The emperor, convinced that the incomprehensible text held secrets of alchemy or eternal life, paid the enormous sum without hesitation. After Rudolf's death, the manuscript's journey becomes murky once again. Evidence suggests it passed to Rudolf's physician, Jacobus Horkicki de Tepenetz, whose faded signature was discovered on the first page through ultraviolet light examination. Later, it found its way into the hands of Georg Baresch, an alchemist from Prague who was both fascinated and frustrated by the manuscript's resistance to understanding. Baresch, desperate to unlock its secrets, contacted the renowned Jesuit scholar Athanasius Kircher in Rome, who had claimed to have deciphered Egyptian hieroglyphics. Baresch sent sample pages to Kircher, begging for help in translation. After Baresch's death, the manuscript was sent to Kircher by his friend Marcy, along with a letter that mentioned the connection to Rudolf II and Roger Bacon. This letter, still attached to the manuscript today, provides one of our few definitive links to its past. And then, silence. The manuscript disappeared from historical record for nearly 250 years until it emerged in that wooden chest at Villa Mondragone, waiting for Wilfrid Voynich to rediscover it and bring it back into the light. For centuries, the manuscript's age remained as mysterious as its contents. Was it truly the work of 13th century philosopher Roger Bacon, as Emperor Rudolf had believed? Was it an ancient text from a lost civilization? Or perhaps a more recent creation designed to appear ancient? The answer remained elusive until 2009, when a team from the University of Arizona finally gained permission to perform radiocarbon dating on tiny samples of the manuscript's vellum pages. The scientific verdict was clear and surprising. The vellum dated to between 1404 and 1438, firmly placing the manuscript's creation in the early Renaissance period, not the Middle Ages as many had speculated. This dating immediately ruled out Roger Bacon as the author, as he had died more than a century earlier in 1292. It also eliminated other proposed authors like the 16th century occultist John Dee or his scribe Edward Kelly, who had been suspected of forging the manuscript to sell to Rudolph II. But the physical analysis of the manuscript revealed even more fascinating details about its creation. The pages are made of high-quality vellum, calfskin specifically, prepared with exceptional care. Microscopic analysis of the ink shows it was created using iron gall formulations common in medieval Europe, applied with quill pens by a practiced hand. The manuscript's pigments have their own story to tell. The vivid blues, greens and reds decorating the mysterious plants and astronomical diagrams were created using materials readily available to medieval artists: ground azurite for blue, copper-based compounds for green, and organic plant extracts for the reds and browns. None of these pigments contain materials that wouldn't have been available in 15th century Europe. What's particularly fascinating is what's missing. Modern analysis has found no traces of modern synthetic pigments, no evidence of artificial aging techniques, and no signs that the manuscript was created in multiple stages or by multiple hands. Everything points to a genuine 15th century document created at one time by individuals working together with a coherent vision. Perhaps most telling is the evidence of use and wear. Stains from handling appear on the lower right corners of many pages, exactly where readers would have turned them over centuries of examination. Some pages show water damage, others have fading consistent with exposure to light over long periods. The binding has been replaced at least once in its history. This is not a document that was created and then hidden away. It was used, studied and handled by generations of puzzled readers. After its rediscovery by Wilfrid Voynich in 1912, the manuscript embarked on perhaps the most documented chapter of its long and mysterious journey. Voynich brought it to America, where he spent the remaining years of his life trying to decode its secrets and establish its provenance, creating elaborate theories about its origins that sometimes stretch beyond what the evidence supported. Upon Voynich's death in 1930, the manuscript passed to his widow, Ethel Lillian Voynich, herself a notable figure as the author of the revolutionary novel The Gadfly. She kept it for nearly 3 decades, until her death in 1960, when it was inherited by her close friend Anne Nill. Within months of acquiring it, Nill sold the manuscript to another rare book dealer, Hans P. Krauss, who had grand plans for the mysterious tome. Krauss, hoping to turn a substantial profit on what he considered one of the most enigmatic books in existence, priced the manuscript at the staggering sum of $160,000, equivalent to well over $1 million today. But fate had different plans. Despite its fame in certain circles, no buyer was willing to meet Krauss's ambitious price. After years of failed attempts to sell it, Krauss made a remarkable decision. In 1969, he donated the manuscript to Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library, where it remains to this day catalogued as MS 408. At Yale, the manuscript underwent the most thorough physical examination of its existence. It was carefully photographed page by page, analysed with ultraviolet light, and eventually digitized, making its mysterious contents available to researchers worldwide without risking damage to the fragile original. The donation to Yale marked a turning point. No longer the property of private collectors with limited access, the Voynich Manuscript became a public enigma, subjected to the scrutiny of linguists, cryptographers, historians, botanists, astronomers, and eventually computer scientists. Today, the manuscript rests in a climate-controlled vault at the Beinecke Library, one of the most secure locations for rare books in the world. Yet, despite its physical stasis, the manuscript's journey through intellectual history continues to evolve. Each year brings new theories, new analyses, and new attempts to crack its code. From Emperor Rudolph's Prague to a modern American university, from private obsession to public fascination, the Voynich manuscript has travelled not just across oceans and centuries, but through the changing landscapes of human knowledge and curiosity. Its journey reflects our persistent desire to unlock the unknown, to make sense of the seemingly senseless, and to connect with voices from the past that seem determined to remain silent. Imagine yourself turning the delicate vellum pages of the Voynich Manuscript for the first time. The initial confusion you might feel quickly gives way to something more intriguing, a sense of organized purpose. Despite its indecipherable text, the manuscript isn't a random collection of gibberish. It's meticulously organized into distinct sections, each with its own visual language and apparent purpose, like chapters in a book whose title we cannot read. The first section you'd encounter, and the largest, is what researchers call the herbal section. Page after page displays detailed illustrations of plants, over 100 of them, rendered in shades of green, blue and brown. Each plant illustration is accompanied by several paragraphs of the mysterious text. Here's where our first real puzzle emerges. Botanists have examined these plants for decades, and most cannot be definitively matched to any known species on Earth. Some resemble familiar herbs like sunflowers or water lilies, but always with disconcerting differences: extra roots where none should exist, impossible leaf arrangements, or flowers combining features of entirely different plant families. Are these plants purely imaginary creations of the artist's mind, or might they represent extinct species? Perhaps they're familiar plants deliberately altered to hide their identity, or maybe they're accurate representations of plants the author encountered in some far-flung region of the world, unknown to European botanists of the time. Each theory raises as many questions as it answers. Moving deeper into the manuscript, you'd next encounter what scholars call the astronomical section. Here, circular diagrams dominate, filled with stars, sun-like faces, and zodiac symbols arranged in mysterious patterns. 12 of these diagrams clearly represent the traditional zodiac signs, though depicted in unusual ways. Taurus isn't the traditional bull, but appears as a charging animal with a flowing mane. Sagittarius holds something resembling a crossbow, rather than the typical bow and arrow. Most intriguing are the small, naked female figures that appear in each zodiac circle, sometimes wearing crowns, sometimes holding stars, always labelled with names written in the manuscript's unknown script. Surrounding each zodiac sign are 30 female figures arranged in barrel-like structures, possibly representing the days of a month. The astronomical section suggests a preoccupation with time, celestial movements, and perhaps astrological predictions, yet the configurations match no known medieval European astronomical system. The biological section presents perhaps the most bizarre imagery in the entire manuscript. Page after page reveals hundreds of small, rounded figures connected by elaborate pipe-like structures. Inside these bulbous shapes float tiny naked women, dozens of them, bathing in green or blue liquid that flows through the interconnected system. Some women have swollen abdomens, others wear crowns, and still others appear to be dancing inside their liquid-filled vessels. What could these images possibly represent? Some scholars suggest they depict a sophisticated understanding of human reproduction, perhaps illustrating pregnancy and fetal development. Others see a metaphorical representation of alchemical processes, with the female figures symbolizing transformative stages. Still others propose these might be medicinal baths, depicting therapeutic procedures for women's health. The biological section remains perhaps the most enigmatic of all, with no clear parallels in any other medieval manuscript. Following this comes the pharmaceutical section, where rows of small drawings resemble jars, containers, and what appear to be medicinal herbs. Each object is labelled with brief text passages, suggesting a catalogue or recipe collection. The neat organisation resembles medieval apothecary guides, yet once again many of the depicted objects correspond to no known medicinal containers of the period. The final substantial section contains densely packed text with few illustrations, what researchers call the recipes section. The text is arranged in short paragraphs, often with star-like symbols marking the beginning of each entry. The format strongly resembles recipe collections or instructional manuals from the medieval period, though without translation, we can only guess at what knowledge these pages might contain. What makes these sections truly remarkable isn't just their content, but how they interact. Cross-references seem to exist. Plants from the herbal section appearing in the pharmaceutical drawings, astronomical symbols recurring in the biological diagrams. The manuscript appears to present not just isolated topics, but an integrated system of knowledge, a comprehensive worldview encoded in both text and image. The mystery of the Voynich Manuscript deepens when we examine not just what it depicts, but how it's written. The script itself is unlike any known writing system, yet it follows patterns that suggest a genuine language rather than random markings. The writing flows from left to right in neatly arranged lines, with clear paragraph breaks and consistent margins. The script consists of between 25 and 30 distinct characters, written in a fluid, almost cursive style that suggests the work of someone highly practiced in this writing system. Individual characters connect smoothly, like the handwriting of someone who has been using this alphabet their entire life. What's immediately striking is the apparent simplicity of the script. Most characters are composed of just one or two pen strokes, lacking the complexity of East Asian writing systems or the ornate features of Arabic. Yet it's this very simplicity that has frustrated cryptographers. There simply aren't enough distinct characters or variations to correspond neatly to most known alphabets. Certain characters appear almost exclusively at the beginning of words, others only in the middle, and still others only at the end, a feature that linguists call positional dependence, which is common in natural languages like Arabic and Hebrew. Statistical analysis reveals other patterns similar to those found in natural languages. Word frequencies follow Zipf's law, where the most common word appears about twice as often as the second most common word, 3 times as often as the third, and so on. And the text shows entropy patterns consistent with meaningful communication rather than random sequences. Then there are the repeating sequences, the same groups of characters appearing throughout the manuscript, like familiar phrases or technical terms in a specialized text. Computer analysis has identified over 100 such sequences that reappear in similar contexts, particularly in the sections that resemble recipes or instructions. Adding another layer of intrigue are the illustrations themselves. The artist employed techniques that were both sophisticated and unusual for the time period. The botanical illustrations show an understanding of plant morphology, yet deliberately avoid the naturalistic style that was becoming fashionable in 15th century Europe. Instead, they employ a flatter, more diagrammatic approach, emphasizing structural relationships over realistic appearance. The astronomical diagrams use color in meaningful ways, blues for night skies, golds for celestial bodies, and demonstrate knowledge of medieval cosmological concepts while arranging them in unfamiliar patterns. The human figures, while simply drawn, show consistent proportions and deliberate postures that communicate specific meanings, even if those meanings remain obscure to us. Many illustrations contain tiny labels written in the manuscript script, directly integrated into the images. Plants have labels attached to specific parts. Astronomical diagrams contain text arranged in concentric circles or radiating patterns. The biological sections, pipe-like structures, feature labels at what appear to be junction points or transitional stages. These aren't decorative additions but seem to function as technical annotations, suggesting the manuscript was designed for practical use, not merely as an art object. Perhaps most telling is the evidence of corrections and revisions throughout the text. Careful examination reveals places where the writer scraped away ink to correct mistakes, a common practice with vellum manuscripts. These corrections follow a consistent pattern. They're almost always single characters or short sequences, suggesting the writer was concerned with accuracy in transcribing or composing the text. The manuscript shows signs of extensive use as well. Certain pages are more worn than others, with smudges and stains concentrated in areas that would have been touched frequently by readers. Some sections contain additional notes or symbols added in margins, possibly by later readers attempting to understand or annotate the text. Taken together, these visual and textual features paint a picture not of random nonsense, but of a coherent, purposeful document created by someone with deep knowledge of a writing system and visual language that remains unknown to modern scholarship. The manuscript doesn't merely contain a code or cipher. It appears to represent an entire system of knowledge with its own internal logic and structure, a window into a worldview that has somehow remained hidden for 6 centuries. The story of humanity's struggle to decode the Voynich Manuscript reads like a who's who of brilliant minds confronting their own limitations. For centuries, the manuscript has attracted and ultimately defeated some of the world's most formidable intellects. The first serious attempt to unlock the manuscript's secrets came from the man whose name it now bears. After discovering the book in 1912, Wilfrid Voynich devoted the remaining 18 years of his life to solving its mystery. His approach combined historical detective work with early cryptographic techniques. Voynich became convinced that the manuscript was the work of Roger Bacon, a 13th-century English philosopher known for his interest in ciphers and experimental science. This theory captivated the public imagination, but Voynich died in 1930 without managing to decipher a single word. As word of the manuscript spread through academic circles, it attracted the attention of Professor William Romaine Newbold of the University of Pennsylvania in the 1920s. Newbold developed an elaborate theory that the manuscript's text wasn't what it appeared to be. He believed the actual message was hidden in microscopic shorthand characters embedded within the larger visible script. Using this approach, Newbold claimed to have translated portions of the text, revealing supposed descriptions of early microscopes and telescopes, and even astronomical observations of nebulae that would have been impossible without advanced optical equipment. Newbold's translation caused a sensation in academic circles until after his death, when fellow cryptographer John Matthews Manley demonstrated that Newbold's microscopic shorthand was actually just cracks in the aging ink. When the same decoding method was applied to other medieval manuscripts, it produced similar readable results, proof that Newbold had merely been finding patterns in randomness, the cryptographic equivalent of seeing faces in clouds. The Voynich manuscript's reputation as an uncrackable cipher grew when it landed on the desk of William Friedman in the 1940s. If anyone could solve it, surely it would be Friedman, the man who had broken Japan's purple cipher during World War II and later became the founding figure of the National Security Agency. Friedman assembled a team of his finest cryptanalysts, including his wife Elizabeth, herself a legendary codebreaker who had helped dismantle Nazi spy rings. The Friedmans approached the manuscript with unprecedented rigor, applying statistical analysis techniques that they had pioneered during the war. They meticulously catalogued character frequencies, mapped word patterns, and searched for telltale signs that would reveal the underlying encryption method. After years of work, they reached a conclusion that continues to influence Voynich research today. The manuscript appeared to be written in an artificial language rather than a simple substitution cipher. By artificial language, they didn't mean nonsense, but rather a constructed language with its own grammar and vocabulary, perhaps created as a form of shorthand or universal language. Concepts that were gaining popularity in intellectual circles during the Renaissance. This theory aligned with the manuscript's carbon, dating to the early 15th century, a time of growing interest in universal language systems. Even the British and American intelligence communities couldn't resist the manuscript's allure. During the Cold War, when cryptanalytic talent was focused primarily on Soviet codes, time was still found for this medieval puzzle. The NSA's finest minds took breaks from national security concerns to ponder the Voynich script, perhaps seeing it as the ultimate test of their analytical abilities. Like all before them, they produced theories, but no translations. John Tiltman, one of Britain's top codebreakers who had helped crack the German Enigma machine, spent considerable time with the manuscript in the 1960s. After extensive analysis, he concluded, the Voynich manuscript was not written to be deliberately unintelligible. It was written to be read by someone. This simple observation underscored what makes the manuscript so fascinating. It bears all the hallmarks of meaningful communication, yet that meaning remains beyond our grasp. The Cold War codebreakers contributed something valuable beyond their failed decipherment attempts. They developed sophisticated statistical methods to analyze the manuscript's linguistic properties. Techniques that revealed its text follows patterns similar to natural languages, with word frequency distributions that mirror those found in meaningful communication. These findings effectively ruled out the possibility that the manuscript was simply random gibberish, keeping hope alive that a solution might someday be found. As computing power grew exponentially in the late 20th century, so did hopes that technology might succeed where human intuition had failed. The Voynich Manuscript became one of the first historical documents to undergo extensive computational analysis, inaugurating the field now known as digital humanities. The 1970s saw the first complete machine-readable transcription of the manuscript undertaken by cryptologist Mary D'Imperio. This painstaking work converted the flowing handwritten characters into standardized symbols that computers could process. For the first time, researchers could run statistical analyses on the entire text rather than just sample pages, revealing patterns invisible to the naked eye. These early computational studies confirmed something remarkable. The manuscript's text displays statistical properties consistent with natural languages. Words cluster in predictable ways. Certain character combinations appear only at the beginning of words, others only at the end. The frequency distribution of word lengths follows patterns similar to those in European languages. Most tellingly, the text shows a property called entropy, a mathematical measure of information content that falls within the range of human languages rather than random strings of symbols. By the 1990s, researchers began applying more sophisticated linguistic computing methods. Jorge Stolfi of the University of Campinas in Brazil proposed that the Voynich text might represent an agglutinative language, a language like Turkish or Finnish, where complex words are built by stringing together smaller units of meaning. Stolfi identified what appeared to be prefixes, stems, and suffixes in the Voynich words, suggesting an underlying grammatical system. The digital age brought new analytical tools. In 2003, Gordon Rugg of Keele University proposed that the manuscript could have been created using a simple table and grill system, essentially a low-tech random text generator that would have been available in the 15th century. Rugg demonstrated how such a system could produce text with statistical properties similar to the Voynich script, reigniting the hoax theory. Yet critics pointed out that while Rugg's system could create text with some Voynich-like features, it couldn't reproduce all the manuscript's linguistic patterns. Neural networks entered the scene in the 2010 S. These artificial intelligence systems designed to recognize patterns in data were trained on the Voynich text in hopes they might detect structures that had eluded human analysts. In 2019, computer scientists from the University of Alberta claimed their AI system had identified the manuscript as encrypted Hebrew. Months later, academic linguists thoroughly debunked this claim, showing how the researchers had inadvertently introduced biases into their analysis. The most promising recent approach comes from computational linguistics, a field that applies computer science to language analysis. In 2016, Greg Kondrak and Bradley Hauer used statistical methods to compare the Voynich text to hundreds of known languages, looking for structural similarities that might suggest a linguistic connection. Their algorithms pointed to Hebrew as the closest match, though their proposed translations failed to convince linguistic experts. What makes these computational approaches so tantalizing is that they consistently identify real linguistic structure in the Voynich text. The manuscript doesn't behave like random, meaningless symbols, it behaves like a language. Yet every proposed solution eventually runs into contradictions and inconsistencies that prevent a complete, coherent reading. Parallel to these computational efforts, interdisciplinary teams have turned to the manuscript's illustrations for clues. Botanists have attempted to identify the plants, pharmacologists have studied the medicinal illustrations, and astronomers have analyzed the celestial diagrams. While these approaches have yielded intriguing connections, such as similarities between some Voynich plants and Mexican flora, suggesting a possible New World connection, none has provided the key to decipherment. The Voynich manuscript doesn't just resist solution, it spawns theories that often say more about the theorists than about the manuscript itself. Over the decades, proposed explanations have ranged from the scholarly to the sensational, creating a fascinating subplot in the manuscript's long history. The natural language hypothesis suggests the manuscript was written in a known historical language, but using an invented script. Candidates have included everything from an obscure dialect of Ukrainian to an extinct form of Nahuatl from Central America. The challenge for these theories is explaining why someone would invent an entirely new writing system, rather than using an existing one, and why, if the content was so valuable, they would render it unreadable to almost everyone. Constructed language theories propose that the manuscript represents an artificial language created for philosophical, scientific, or mystical purposes. During the medieval and Renaissance periods, the dream of a perfect language, one that could precisely represent the true nature of things, captivated many scholars. The 13th century philosopher Ramon Lull developed a system of rotating discs that could generate combinations of concepts, while the 17th century polymath Gottfried Leibniz worked on a universal characteristic that would represent all human thought. Could the Voynich Manuscript be an early attempt at such a language? The encipherment theories suggest the text is encrypted, a known language disguised through systematic substitution or transposition of letters. While historically plausible, secret writing was well established by the 15th century, the manuscript has stubbornly resisted all known historical decryption techniques. Modern computer analysis suggests the text is too complex for simple medieval ciphers, yet too structured to be strong encryption in the modern sense. Then there are the hoax theories, which have gained prominence in recent decades. According to these views, the manuscript was created deliberately to be meaningless yet appear meaningful, a Renaissance forgery designed to fetch a high price from collectors like Emperor Rudolph II, who was known for his interest in occult texts. The 16th century occultist Edward Kelly has been suggested as a possible author, having a history of producing angel languages and mysterious texts for his associate John Dee. The carbon dating of the vellum to the early 15th century seemed to rule out Kelly, but hoax proponents point out that the manuscript could have been created on older, unused vellum. Modern analysis of the ink shows it was applied shortly after the vellum was prepared, weakening but not eliminating this possibility. Controversies rage not just over the manuscript's meaning, but over basic questions about its nature. Is it a unified document created at one time, or a compilation of texts from different sources? Was it written by one person or many? Does it represent a tradition of knowledge that was passed down through generations, or a one-time creation? Scholars disagree on these fundamental issues. Even the manuscript's geographical origins remain disputed. The European hypothesis points to its physical characteristics. The vellum preparation and binding techniques are consistent with 15th century European practices. The illustrations of recognizable zodiac symbols and bathing women resemble European traditions. Yet other researchers point to elements that seem distinctly non-European, such as plant illustrations resembling New World species and astronomical concepts that don't align with medieval European cosmology. The cultural background of the author or authors is equally contentious. Some see the manuscript as the product of mainstream medieval scholarship, perhaps from a university setting or monastic scriptorium. Others argue it represents knowledge from marginalized traditions, folk medicine, women's health practices, or Jewish mystical traditions operating at the fringes of medieval Christian society. What makes these controversies so persistent is that the manuscript contains just enough familiar elements to suggest connections to known traditions, yet enough anomalies to prevent any single theory from fully explaining it. Each proposed solution seems to illuminate some aspects of the manuscript while leaving others in darkness. Perhaps most fascinating is how the manuscript functions as a mirror, reflecting the preoccupations of each era that studies it. In the early 20th century, when classical cryptography was flourishing, researchers saw it as an elaborate cipher. During the Cold War, when computer analysis was revolutionizing linguistics, it became a problem of statistical patterns. In our current age of artificial intelligence and big data, it's viewed as a challenge for machine learning algorithms. The Voynich Manuscript has survived 6 centuries, not just as a physical object, but as a persistent question mark, a reminder of the limits of our understanding and the enduring power of an unsolved mystery. On a crisp autumn morning in 2023, Dr. Elena Marković stepped onto the podium at the International Cryptographic History Symposium in Prague. The audience, composed of the world's leading experts in historical ciphers and ancient scripts, fell silent in anticipation. For 15 years, they had watched Dr. Marković's career with interest as she systematically decoded previously impenetrable scripts from medieval Europe and the Near East. But today's announcement was different. Today she claimed to have done the impossible. Dr. Marković's journey to this moment began far from the rarefied world of ancient manuscripts. Born to Serbian immigrants in Toronto, she displayed an uncanny gift for languages from an early age, mastering Serbian, English, French and Latin before her 12th birthday. While other children played video games, young Elena created elaborate secret codes, challenging her friends to decipher messages hidden in patterns that grew increasingly sophisticated. "I was that strange kid who read dictionaries for fun," she often tells her graduate students. "I was fascinated not just by words, but by the structure underneath them, the hidden patterns that make communication possible." This passion led her to linguistics at the University of Toronto, where she specialized in computational approaches to ancient languages. Her doctoral dissertation, completed in 2008, introduced a groundbreaking algorithm for analyzing extinct writing systems with limited samples, a problem that had plagued historical linguists for centuries. Using this method, she successfully identified patterns in Etruscan texts that had eluded scholars for generations, establishing previously unknown connections to Proto-Italic languages. Dr. Marković's professional turning point came in 2014, when she led the team that deciphered the Codex Hagenbergensis, a 12th century encrypted medical text from southern Germany. Previous scholars had dismissed the codex as nonsensical scribal practice, but Marković's team proved it contained detailed pharmaceutical recipes written in a deliberate cipher designed to protect trade secrets. The work established her reputation as someone who could see order where others saw only chaos. What distinguished Dr. Marković from other brilliant linguists was her unique interdisciplinary approach. While most researchers specialized in either computational analysis or historical philology, she moved fluidly between these worlds, combining cutting-edge machine learning with deep knowledge of medieval manuscript traditions. Her faculty appointment at Princeton's Institute for Advanced Linguistic Studies allowed her to assemble a team equally comfortable discussing medieval herbalism and neural network architecture. Yet despite her impressive credentials, many in the audience that day in Prague remained skeptical. The Voynich Manuscript had defeated everyone who had approached it for more than a century. What made this attempt different? Unlike previous researchers who had dabbled with the manuscript as a side project, Dr. Marković had devoted 7 uninterrupted years to the challenge. She had accessed funding that allowed her to assemble a team of 20 specialists. Linguists, botanists, medieval historians, cryptographers and programmers, working in concert towards a single goal. More importantly, she had begun with a fundamentally different assumption than her predecessors. Previous attempts to decipher the Voynich manuscript failed, she explained to the audience, because they approached it as either a straightforward cipher of a known language or as complete nonsense. The truth, as we discovered, lies in a more nuanced middle ground, a previously undocumented language written in a unique writing system that was intelligible to a specific community but impenetrable to outsiders. Dr. Marković's academic record reflected a consistent theme, finding meaning in scripts that others had dismissed as indecipherable. Her published works, over 40 peer-reviewed articles and 3 scholarly books, demonstrated a methodical approach to seemingly intractable linguistic puzzles. From partial inscriptions on Etruscan funeral urns to fragmented texts from medieval trade routes, she had built her career on giving voice to silenced historical communications. What truly set her apart, however, was her profound understanding of how languages evolve in isolated communities, particularly among marginalized groups. Her second book, Hidden Tongues, Secret Languages of Medieval Women, documented how female religious communities developed specialized vocabulary and sometimes even modified writing systems to communicate knowledge considered inappropriate for women in medieval society. This background proved crucial to her Voynich hypothesis, as we shall see. Critics noted that Dr. Marković had made bold claims before. In 2018, she announced a partial decipherment of Linear A, the undecoded writing system of ancient Crete, only to retract several key assertions after closer analysis. Yet her willingness to acknowledge errors and adjust theories based on new evidence had earned her respect even from academic opponents. She approached problems with confidence, but without the dogmatism that had undermined previous Voynich researchers. As Dr. Marković prepared to reveal her methodology to the Prague Symposium, she reminded the audience of something important. Decipherment is never the work of a lone genius having a sudden insight. It's a painstaking collaborative process built on countless small observations, refined through constant testing and questioning. What I present today represents the combined efforts of dozens of researchers building upon a century of previous work, including the many failed attempts that showed us where not to look. Dr. Marković's approach to deciphering the Voynich Manuscript broke radically from previous attempts by treating it not as a single problem, but as three interconnected puzzles, identifying the writing system, determining the underlying language, and understanding the cultural context that produced it. Where earlier researchers had focused almost exclusively on breaking the code, her team simultaneously attacked all three aspects, allowing insights from each area to inform the others. The first phase of her work involved creating the most comprehensive digital model of the manuscript ever attempted. Previous researchers had worked with transcriptions that converted the manuscript's flowing script into standardized symbols. Dr. Marković's team developed advanced image recognition algorithms that captured subtle variations in character formation, identifying patterns that suggested different scribal hands and writing sessions. We discovered that the manuscript was likely written by three different people working in close collaboration, she explained. The primary scribe wrote approximately 70% of the text, while two others contributed to specific sections, particularly in the pharmaceutical and recipe portions. This pattern is consistent with a master-apprentice relationship or a small community with specialized knowledge domains. This observation led to a crucial insight. The manuscript was not simply a record of information, but a teaching tool, a document designed to transmit knowledge from one generation to the next. This explained the repetitive nature of certain passages, which previous analysts had dismissed as meaningless padding. Dr. Marković recognized these as pedagogical devices similar to those found in medieval instructional texts. For the linguistic analysis, her team developed what she called constraint-based evolutionary modeling, a technique that tested millions of possible language structures against the manuscript's patterns. Unlike previous computational approaches that searched for direct matches with known languages, her model explored the vast space of possible language structures, including hypothetical languages that combined features from different linguistic families. Languages rarely exist in isolation, she told the audience. They borrow, blend, and evolve through contact. We allowed our models to explore hybrid possibilities that previous approaches had ruled out by design. The breakthrough came when they focused on what linguists call substrate influence, the way features of a speaker's native language affect their use of a second language. The manuscript's statistics showed patterns consistent with speakers of a Slavic language writing in a Romance language framework, with additional features that suggested Arabic influence in specialized terminology. This led to a startling hypothesis. The manuscript represented a women's medical and botanical knowledge tradition that developed in the border regions between Latin Europe and the Arabic-influenced territories of southern Spain or Sicily, possibly within a community of women with Slavic origins. To test this theory, Dr. Marković's team turned to the manuscript's botanical illustrations. Previous researchers had struggled to identify the plants because they had looked primarily at Western European herbals for comparison. Her team expanded the search to include folk medicine traditions from Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean borderlands, focusing particularly on texts associated with women's medical practices. When we stopped trying to match the Voynich plants with official medical herbals and instead compared them with folk tradition illustrations, the identification rate jumped from under 15% to over 60%, she explained. These weren't the plants of university-trained physicians, they were the plants of midwives, village healers and women's health practitioners. The cultural context analysis brought additional evidence. The manuscript's unique female imagery, particularly the unclothed women in the biological section, had puzzled researchers for decades. Dr. Marković compared these illustrations with rare surviving texts on women's medicine and reproductive health from medieval Europe, finding striking parallels in how female anatomy was depicted in contexts related to pregnancy, childbirth and gynecological conditions. With these three analytical streams converging, Dr. Marković's team developed a tentative decoding key based on the hypothesis that the manuscript represented a proto-Romance language written in a unique script developed specifically to record women's medical knowledge. This key wasn't based on simple substitution of letters, but on understanding the phonological principles that governed the writing system. The most innovative aspect of Dr. Marković's approach was its iterative nature. Rather than attempting a complete decipherment at once, her team used partial translations to generate predictions about unknown sections, then tested those predictions against the manuscript's internal patterns. Each successful prediction strengthened the model, each failed prediction prompted refinements. Decipherment isn't like turning a key in a lock, she explained. It's more like tuning an instrument, gradually adjusting multiple variables until harmony emerges from noise. We didn't have a eureka moment where everything suddenly became clear. We had thousands of small confirmations that gradually built confidence in our approach. To validate their methodology, the team deliberately withheld 20% of the manuscript from their analysis, using it as a test bed for their developing translation model. When their system began successfully predicting patterns in this untouched text, they knew they were on the right track. After 7 years of painstaking analysis, Dr. Marković's team arrived at a series of findings that challenged conventional wisdom about the Voynich Manuscript. If correct, these discoveries wouldn't just solve a centuries-old puzzle, they would fundamentally alter our understanding of knowledge transmission in medieval Europe. The first and most significant finding concerned the manuscript's language. According to Dr. Marković, the text was written in what she termed medical proto-Romance, a previously undocumented early Romance language that preserved vocabulary and structures from vulgar Latin, but incorporated specialized terminology from Arabic medical sources and Slavic folk traditions. This wasn't a mainstream language of literature or commerce, she explained. It was a specialized vernacular that evolved specifically to discuss medical and botanical knowledge among practitioners who operated outside the male-dominated university system of the time. This explained why the manuscript had resisted identification with any known European language. Previous researchers had searched for matches with major written languages, Latin, Greek, German, Arabic, while the Voynich text represented a vernacular tradition that rarely appeared in formal written records. It was a language spoken primarily by women and passed down through oral tradition, only occasionally preserved in writing. The writing system proved equally revelatory. Dr. Marković's analysis suggested it wasn't an encryption of a standard alphabet, but a syllabary, a writing system where each symbol represents a complete syllable rather than a single sound. Syllabaries are relatively rare in European contexts, but were known in certain specialized applications. The writing system appears to have been designed specifically for this medical botanical knowledge domain, she told the audience. It prioritizes sounds that frequently appear in plant names and medical terminology while minimizing distinctions that weren't relevant to this specialized vocabulary. Perhaps most controversially, Dr. Marković proposed that the manuscript was created by a community of women healers, possibly associated with a religious order or informal network that preserved and transmitted medical knowledge outside the male-dominated university system of medieval Europe. The manuscript represents a women's knowledge tradition that existed in parallel with the better documented male medical establishment, she explained. These women operated in a legal and cultural grey area, not fully sanctioned by authorities, but tolerated because of the essential services they provided in women's healthcare, particularly related to childbirth and gynecological conditions. To support this claim, she pointed to the manuscript's focus on reproductive imagery, its detailed illustrations of medicinal baths, a treatment particularly associated with women's health in medieval practice, and the prominence of female figures throughout the astronomical and biological sections. The most compelling evidence came from Dr. Marković's partial translations of selected passages. One section from the herbal portion, accompanying an illustration of what appears to be a type of Artemisia plant, translated to, "The mother herb brings down the moon blood when it fails to flow. Prepare a warm bath with 7 fresh branches and have the woman sit in the water until it cools. For younger women, use only 5 branches as their blood flows more readily." This reference to moon blood, menstruation, and the specific preparation method aligned precisely with folk remedies documented in fragmentary women's medical texts from southern Europe. Similar matches appeared in sections related to pregnancy, childbirth and infant care. The astronomical section, previously thought to be astrological, revealed a sophisticated system for tracking fertility cycles and predicting optimal times for conception or contraception, medical knowledge that would have been particularly valuable to women in an era with limited reproductive options. Even the mysterious biological section with its pipes and naked female figures found explanation in this context. Dr. Marković's translation suggested these depicted different stages of pregnancy and fetal development, with the flowing pipes representing not actual physical structures, but the believed pathways of vital essences that medieval medicine thought necessary for successful gestation. What we're seeing is a comprehensive manual of women's medicine, Dr. Marković concluded. From menstrual health to conception, pregnancy, childbirth and postpartum care, all documented in a specialized language and writing system designed to preserve and transmit this knowledge within a specific community. If correct, these translations would represent not just a solution to a historical puzzle, but the recovery of a lost tradition of women's knowledge, a precious window into how communities preserved and transmitted essential medical information outside the formal structures of medieval scholarship. As Dr. Marković presented her findings to the assembled experts in Prague, she addressed the question that hung over the proceedings. How could anyone be confident that this decipherment succeeded where hundreds of previous attempts had failed? The validation of any proposed decipherment rests on 3 pillars, she explained. Internal consistency, external verification and predictive power. Our work has been subjected to rigorous testing on all 3 fronts. The internal consistency of her translation system was demonstrated through statistical analysis. When applied across the entire manuscript, her decoding key produced text with natural language patterns, appropriate word length distributions, consistent grammar structures, and the expected frequency of linguistic features like articles and prepositions. Most importantly, related concepts appeared in predictable contexts, with plant names recurring in similar passages and procedural terms appearing in recipe-like sections. For external verification, Dr. Marković's team compared their translated passages with known historical medical texts, particularly the fragmentary tradition of women's medicine preserved in sources like the 12th century Trotula manuscripts and folk remedy collections from southern and eastern Europe. The terminologies and treatment methods revealed by their translations showed remarkable correspondence with these documented historical practices. Perhaps most convincingly, the decipherment demonstrated predictive power. Using their translation system, the team was able to make informed predictions about sections of the manuscript that hadn't yet been analyzed. When they predicted, for example, that illustrations of blue flowering plants would be associated with text mentioning eye conditions, following a known pattern in medieval medicine, subsequent translation confirmed exactly this connection. The strongest evidence for our approach, Dr. Marković noted, is that it simultaneously explains multiple aspects of the manuscript that previously seemed unrelated. The same decoding key that makes sense of the herbal section also illuminates the astronomical diagrams and clarifies the purpose of the biological illustrations. However, Dr. Marković was careful to acknowledge the limitations of her work. Approximately 30% of the manuscript remained untranslated, particularly sections with unusual character combinations that might represent specialized terminology without known parallels in documented sources. Some plant illustrations still defied identification, possibly representing species that have since become extinct or changed significantly through cultivation. To address concerns about confirmation bias, the tendency to see patterns that confirm one's existing theories, Dr. Marković implemented an unusually rigorous peer review process. Her team divided into translation and validation groups that worked independently. The translation group provided their interpretations, which the validation group then tested against alternative explanations without knowing the original translation. We've also made our complete methodology and data available to the academic community, she explained. True validation comes not from our confidence in our results, but from the ability of others to reproduce and test our findings independently. This commitment to transparency represented a departure from previous Voynich decipherment claims, many of which relied on methodologies that couldn't be systematically tested or replicated by other researchers. Dr. Marković invited skepticism, providing specific criteria by which her theory could be falsified if incorrect. The initial response from the academic community was cautiously optimistic but reserved. Linguists praised the methodological rigor, while remaining careful not to endorse the specific conclusions without further testing. Historians of medicine found the medical botanical interpretations compelling, but requested more comparative analysis with known texts. Cryptographers acknowledged the statistical coherence of the proposed solution, but raised questions about specific character interpretations. A true decipherment doesn't end scholarly conversation, it begins a new one, Dr. Marković concluded. If our work is correct, we've opened a door to a lost world of knowledge. Now we invite others to walk through that door with us, to test every floorboard, examine every wall, and help us understand the structure we've discovered. The Voynich Manuscript has guarded its secrets for 600 years. It deserves nothing less than our most rigorous scientific scrutiny before we claim to have finally understood its message. As the presentation concluded, the audience rose in standing ovation, not necessarily in endorsement of her conclusions, but in recognition of a methodological approach that, regardless of its ultimate correctness, had advanced the field of historical linguistics and set a new standard for interdisciplinary collaboration in manuscript studies. The morning after Dr. Marković's presentation in Prague, academic forums erupted with activity. Scholars who had dedicated decades to the Voynich puzzle found themselves divided between cautious optimism and protective skepticism. Dr. Marković's inbox filled with hundreds of messages, congratulations, questions, collaboration offers, and more than a few challenges. Among the first to publicly endorse her findings was Dr. Isabella Fuentes, a medieval historian specializing in women's medical practices at the University of Barcelona. At 73 years old, Fuentes had spent over 40 years documenting fragmentary evidence of women healers whose knowledge had been systematically erased from official medical history. What strikes me as immediately compelling, Fuentes wrote in her widely shared analysis, is how Marković's translations align with medical practices we've only glimpsed in scattered references before now. The manuscript's description of using artemisia for menstrual regulation matches precisely with folk remedies documented in my fieldwork among elderly women in remote Spanish villages, practices they learned from their grandmothers, who learned from their grandmothers before them. This isn't the kind of knowledge you could simply guess or fabricate. Fuentes wasn't alone. A growing cohort of medieval historians specializing in marginalized knowledge traditions found themselves nodding in recognition as they reviewed Marković's translations. These scholars had long suspected that women's medical knowledge operated in a parallel universe to the male-dominated university system, but evidence had remained frustratingly fragmented. Dr. Thomas Whitaker, curator of medieval manuscripts at the British Library, initially approached Marković's findings with professional caution. After spending a week meticulously comparing her translations with related historical documents, he called a press conference that sent ripples through the academic community. "I've examined dozens of claimed Voynich solutions during my 30-year career," Whitaker told the assembled journalists, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Every previous attempt has collapsed under scrutiny. What distinguishes Dr. Marković's work is its impressive explanatory power across multiple aspects of the manuscript." He projected a slide showing a Voynich plant illustration alongside Marković's translation and a previously overlooked 13th century fragment from southern France. "The linguistic patterns she's identified don't just make grammatical sense, they connect to actual historical practices documented in other sources. This isn't just plausible, it's illuminating." Perhaps the most surprising endorsement came from Professor Akira Tanaka, a computational linguist who had publicly dismissed 3 previous Voynich solutions as statistical wishful thinking. After running Marković's methodology through his own independent verification process, Tanaka posted a detailed analysis on his influential academic blog. "The statistical coherence of Marković's translation system exceeds random chance by several orders of magnitude," he wrote. "When applied to sections of the manuscript not used in developing the system, it continues to produce linguistically consistent text." This is the hallmark of genuine decipherment rather than cherry-picked coincidences. The supportive voices extended beyond academia. The New York Times ran a front-page feature titled "The Women Who Whispered Through Time," exploring how the manuscript might represent one of history's most remarkable examples of knowledge preservation by a marginalized group. The article included interviews with contemporary midwives and herbalists who recognized elements of their own traditional knowledge in Marković's translations. Documentary filmmakers descended on Marković's Princeton office, each hoping to secure exclusive rights to tell the story of the manuscript's decoding. Netflix, the BBC and National Geographic all began development on competing documentaries, recognizing the narrative's powerful combination of historical mystery, cutting-edge science, and women's hidden history. A particularly moving endorsement came from Sofia Dominguez, an 89-year-old traditional healer from rural Spain who had learned plant remedies from her grandmother. When shown translations of the Voynich herbal section by a visiting anthropologist, Dominguez reportedly touched the pages with tears in her eyes. "My grandmother told me our knowledge was ancient," she said, "that it had been passed down since before the time of writing. I always believed her, but now I can see it with my own eyes." Social media amplified the discovery further. The hashtag #VoynichWomen trended for days as people shared Marković's findings alongside personal stories of traditional knowledge passed down through female family members. Medical historians, midwives, and herbalists created viral threads explaining how specific translations aligned with practices that had survived in isolated communities into the modern era. Even institutions known for their conservatism found themselves cautiously embracing the findings. The Beinecke Library at Yale, home to the manuscript itself, hosted a special exhibition pairing high-resolution images of Voynich pages with Marković's translations and related historical artifacts. The exhibition drew record crowds, with visitors often waiting hours to glimpse the famous manuscript and its newly revealed secrets. "We're witnessing something remarkable," said Dr. Raymond Chen, curator of the exhibition. "For 600 years this manuscript has spoken to us in a language we couldn't understand. Now, for the first time, it's beginning to whisper its secrets. Whether Dr. Marković's translations prove to be completely accurate, or just a stepping stone toward full understanding, they've already transformed how we view this historical treasure." Not everyone was ready to embrace Marković's findings. In the wood-panelled faculty lounge at Oxford University's Bodleian Library, Dr. Richard Whitfield leaned forward in his leather chair, his face flushed with indignation as BBC cameras recorded his response. "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence," he said, his British accent crisp with authority. "What we have here is a compelling narrative wrapped around wishful thinking and methodological sleight of hand." Whitfield, a world-renowned cryptographer who had spent 30 years studying medieval ciphers, had emerged as the most vocal critic of Marković's work. His objections weren't personal, they were methodological, and in the world of academic cryptography, methodology was everything. "The fundamental problem is circular reasoning," Whitfield explained, sketching a diagram for the camera. "Dr. Marković claims to identify patterns consistent with the proto-Romance language, but without independent evidence that such a language existed in this specific form, she's essentially creating the language she claims to have discovered." Whitfield wasn't alone in his skepticism. Dr. Amira Hassan, historical linguist at Cairo University, published a detailed critique pointing out inconsistencies in Marković's phonological reconstruction. "The proposed sound values for certain characters change depending on their context," she wrote, "in ways that seem designed to force the text to fit preconceived translations rather than following consistent linguistic rules." The skeptics focused particularly on what they saw as cherry-picking, the tendency to highlight successful translations while downplaying sections that resisted Marković's methodology. They noted that approximately 30% of the manuscript remained untranslated, with Marković attributing these sections to specialized terminology or damaged text. To critics, this selective approach undermined the entire project. "A genuine decipherment should work for the entire text," insisted Professor Juan Morales of the University of Madrid in a blistering review published in the Journal of Historical Cryptography. "If your key only unlocks certain doors and not others, you haven't found the master key, you've just picked a few easy locks." Statistical experts raised concerns about the validation process as well. Dr. Rebecca Klein, who specialized in computational approaches to ancient scripts at MIT, published a paper titled "Pattern Recognition versus Pattern Imposition in the Voynich Manuscript." Her analysis suggested that Marković's team might have unconsciously calibrated their algorithms to find the patterns they expected to see. "When we ran similar analyses without the specific parameters Marković's team selected," Klein explained in a widely shared TED talk, "the statistical support for a proto-Romance language dropped significantly. This doesn't mean they're wrong, but it does suggest their confidence level should be much lower than claimed." Perhaps the most damaging criticism came from Dr. Lauren Williams, a historian of medicine who initially supported Marković's findings before discovering what she believed were anachronisms in the translated content. Williams identified several plant uses and medical procedures in the proposed translations that seemed to reflect knowledge not documented in Europe until centuries after the manuscript's creation. Either this manuscript was written by time travellers, Williams quipped during a panel discussion that went viral online, or we're seeing modern medical concepts projected backward onto medieval text. Occam's razor suggests the latter. The skeptics weren't limited to academia. Professional cryptographers from intelligence communities also weighed in. A retired NSA codebreaker writing under the pseudonym Cypher published a detailed technical analysis on a popular cryptography blog, arguing that Marković's approach violated fundamental principles of decipherment. In any valid decoding of an unknown script, he wrote, you should be able to provide a clear step-by-step process that others can follow to arrive at the same result independently. Marković's methodology relies too heavily on interpretive leaps that can't be objectively verified. Media outlets that had initially celebrated the breakthrough began publishing more nuanced follow-up pieces with titles like Voynich Solution, Revolutionary Discovery, or Academic Wishful Thinking. The pendulum of public opinion began swinging toward a more measured position, acknowledging the significance of Marković's work while recognizing legitimate questions about its conclusions. Online forums dedicated to the Voynich Manuscript became battlegrounds between supporters and critics, with detailed technical arguments flying back and forth. Amateur linguists and code breakers who had spent years developing their own theories about the manuscript were particularly resistant, having invested too much in alternative explanations to easily abandon them. The debate took an unfortunate turn when critics began questioning not just Marković's methodology, but her motives as well. A small but vocal minority suggested she had rushed to publication for fame or funding, prioritizing media attention over academic rigor. These personal attacks prompted over 200 prominent linguists and historians to sign an open letter condemning such criticism and calling for focus on the scientific merits of her work rather than speculations about intent. Even among those who rejected Marković's specific conclusions, many acknowledged that her approach had advanced the field. Dr. Shiori Takahashi, a linguistic anthropologist who published a detailed critique of Marković's phonological reconstructions, nonetheless concluded her paper by noting, whether or not this specific solution proves correct, Marković's interdisciplinary methodology represents a significant advancement in how we approach historical linguistic puzzles. She has expanded the toolkit for all of us working in this field. 6 months after her initial announcement, Dr. Marković addressed her critics directly in a keynote speech at the American Historical Association's annual meeting. Rather than defensively dismissing their concerns, she incorporated many of their critiques into a revised and more nuanced presentation of her findings. Science progresses not through unwavering certainty, but through productive doubt, she told the packed auditorium. I welcome the scrutiny my work has received. Where valid concerns have been raised, we've adjusted our models and clarified our limitations. This isn't about being right, it's about collectively getting closer to the truth. This approach, acknowledging valid criticism while defending core findings, earned Marković respect even from skeptics. The debate continued in academic journals and conferences, but with a more collaborative tone as researchers on both sides recognized they shared a common goal, understanding one of history's most enigmatic documents. As the initial media frenzy subsided, the Voynich Manuscript found itself in an unfamiliar position, no longer an impenetrable mystery, but not fully solved either. It existed in a liminal space between known and unknown, with Marković's work representing not an endpoint but a significant milestone in the manuscript's 6th-century journey toward understanding. If Dr. Marković's decoding proves correct, the Voynich Manuscript doesn't just solve a centuries-old puzzle. It rewrites significant chapters of medieval history that have long been overlooked or deliberately erased. The manuscript offers us a rare portal into a shadow world of knowledge that existed alongside but separate from the well-documented male intellectual traditions of medieval Europe. Imagine walking through a museum filled with the medical texts of medieval Europe. You'd see beautifully illuminated manuscripts written by monks and university physicians, all in Latin, all following the established theories of Galen and Hippocrates. You'd see careful illustrations of bloodletting procedures, discussions of the four humours, and treatments prescribed by men for patients they often never physically examined. This is the medical history we've inherited through official channels, a history preserved in university libraries and monastery collections, but there was another medical tradition hiding in plain sight. In rural communities across Europe, in the back rooms of urban households, and in the modest quarters of midwives and healers, a different kind of medicine was practiced, one centred on direct observation, hands-on care, and generations of practical experience. This was largely women's medicine, concerned especially with matters that male physicians rarely addressed: childbirth, menstrual health, fertility, and infant care. What makes the Voynich Manuscript so revolutionary, explains medical historian Dr. Sarah Tanner, who worked closely with Marković's team, is that it appears to be one of the only surviving comprehensive documents from this shadow tradition. These women weren't just practicing medicine, they were systematically documenting their knowledge, creating their own botanical classifications, developing specialized terminology, and teaching this system to new generations. The manuscript's botanical illustrations, long dismissed as fantastical or incompetent because they didn't match official herbals, now reveal something far more interesting: an alternative classification system based on medicinal properties rather than physical appearances. Plants were grouped by their effects on women's reproductive health, categorized by whether they stimulated or suppressed menstruation, eased labor pains, increased milk production, or prevented conception. Even more remarkably, the manuscript's infamous biological section, with its naked women in flowing pipes, appears to document understanding of female anatomy that wouldn't be recognized in official medicine for centuries. While university-trained physicians were still teaching that the womb wandered freely through a woman's body, causing various ailments, these women healers had mapped the actual reproductive system with surprising accuracy. They knew things about female anatomy that male doctors wouldn't discover for centuries, Dr. Tanner notes. Not because they were conducting autopsies or following scientific methods as we understand them today, but because they were directly attending births, miscarriages, and gynecological issues, observing firsthand what worked and what didn't. Perhaps most startling are the manuscript's discussions of contraception and deliberate family planning, topics that were strictly taboo in official medical and religious contexts. Certain herbal preparations are described as preventing the seed from taking root, or bringing down the delayed blood without harm. Careful euphemisms for what we would now recognize as abortifacients and contraceptives. These women were providing essential healthcare services that official medicine ignored or condemned, explains Dr. Tanner. The manuscript doesn't present these practices as immoral or controversial, but as standard aspects of women's healthcare. That perspective simply doesn't exist in the official medical literature of the period. The astronomical sections of the manuscript reveal another historical bombshell, evidence that these healers were tracking celestial movements not primarily for astrological purposes, as previously assumed, but as a sophisticated calendar system for tracking menstrual cycles, fertility windows, and gestational progress. The 30 female figures surrounding each zodiac sign appear to represent a method for counting days within a menstrual cycle, with different positions and postures indicating optimal times for conception or contraception. They created a practical system that allowed women to exercise some control over their reproductive lives in an era when such matters were supposedly entirely in God's hands, notes Dr. Rebecca Chen, an archaeoastronomer who studied the manuscript's celestial diagrams. This wasn't just healthcare, it was a form of autonomy and self-determination that history has largely erased. The manuscript also challenges our understanding of medieval women's literacy and education. While official historical records show vanishingly low rates of literacy among women, particularly in scientific or medical contexts, the Voynich Manuscript suggests the existence of a parallel educational tradition where specialized knowledge was systematically taught to women by other women, complete with texts, illustrations, and formalized instruction. They didn't just know things, points out historical anthropologist Dr. Michael Rivera. They developed a systematic way to teach these things. The manuscript's repetitive structures, its careful illustrations labeled with specialized terms, its progressive organization from basic concepts to more complex applications, these are the hallmarks of a teaching document created by experienced educators. Perhaps most poignantly, the manuscript provides a window into the lives and thoughts of medieval women who left almost no other traces in the historical record. While we have abundant writings from educated men of the period, their philosophical treatises, legal opinions, and personal correspondence, we have precious little that captures the voices of women, particularly those outside aristocratic circles. When I read the translated passages describing childbirth complications and their remedies, confides Dr. Tanner, I'm struck by the compassion in the language. There's a passage that translates roughly as, "When the mother fears during a difficult birth, hold her hands firmly and remind her of her strength, for fear makes the womb tighten and the passage narrow." This isn't just medical instruction, it's human connection across centuries. We're hearing the actual voice of a medieval woman speaking directly to other women about their shared experiences. If the decoding holds up to ongoing scholarly scrutiny, the Voynich Manuscript may force a fundamental re-evaluation of women's roles in medieval intellectual and medical history. It suggests that the absence of women from the official historical record reflects not their absence from intellectual life, but rather the systematic exclusion of their contributions from the institutions that preserved knowledge. History is written by those who control the archives, Dr. Rivera reminds us. For centuries we've measured medieval knowledge by what survived in university libraries and church collections, institutions that systematically excluded women. The Voynich Manuscript suggests that an entire parallel tradition of women's knowledge existed, largely invisible to official history because it was transmitted through channels that left few permanent traces. Perhaps most significantly, the manuscript appears to have been created during the very period when European authorities began the systematic persecution of wise women as witches. The early 15th century saw the beginning of witch-hunting treatises and the first mass trials that would eventually claim the lives of tens of thousands of women across Europe, with midwives and healers particularly vulnerable to accusation. The creation of a coded text using an invented script suddenly makes perfect sense in this historical context, explains Dr. Marković. These weren't occult secrets or mystical knowledge. They were practical medical techniques being preserved at a time when such knowledge could be literally fatal for the women who possessed it. They weren't hiding their knowledge because it was dangerous. They were hiding it because they were in danger. Beyond its historical revelations, the decoding of the Voynich Manuscript has sent shockwaves through the field of historical linguistics. If Dr. Marković's analysis is correct, the manuscript represents not just an unknown text, but an entirely unknown writing system and previously undocumented language, a discovery comparable to the decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphics or Linear B. What makes this so extraordinary from a linguistic perspective, explains Dr. Thomas Harrington, a specialist in Romance language evolution who wasn't involved in the original research but has reviewed Marković's findings, is that it represents a missing link in the development of Romance languages, a vernacular form that preserves features of vulgar Latin that had disappeared from other documented languages by the 15th century. The medical proto-Romance language identified by Marković's team appears to have developed in relative isolation, specifically for transmitting specialized knowledge. Unlike mainstream Romance languages that evolved through broad popular usage and official documentation, this specialized language evolved to serve a specific community with particular communication needs. It's like discovering a linguistic time capsule, Dr. Harrington continues. Mainstream languages like Italian, Spanish and French were constantly changing through widespread use, political standardization and literary development. But this specialized language, used by a limited community for specific purposes, preserved archaic features while developing unique specialized vocabulary for medical and botanical concepts. What makes the Voynich language particularly valuable to linguists is its extensive technical vocabulary related to women's health, botanical medicine and natural processes, domains that received relatively little attention in mainstream medieval texts. Words for reproductive anatomy, menstrual cycles, pregnancy stages and childbirth complications appear with a precision and detail unmatched in contemporary Latin medical texts. It's as if we found a specialized medical dictionary from a period when such things weren't supposed to exist, notes Dr. Harrington, and not just any medical dictionary, but one focused on women's health at a time when that subject was barely addressed in official medical literature. The writing system itself represents a remarkable innovation, a syllabary specifically designed for the language's phonological patterns and specialized vocabulary. Unlike the Latin alphabet, which European vernaculars awkwardly adapted to their needs, this writing system appears purpose-built for its specific context. Whoever created this writing system had a sophisticated understanding of phonology, explains Dr. Catherine Wong, a writing systems specialist who consulted on the project. They identified the core syllable patterns of their language and created a systematic way to represent them efficiently. It's not primitive or simplistic, it's elegant and specialized. What's particularly striking is the efficiency of the system for its medical botanical purpose. Plant names and anatomical terms that would require many letters in Latin script can be expressed in just a few characters in the Voynich system, making it ideal for labeling illustrations or creating compact reference texts. It's almost like they invented a medical shorthand, notes Dr. Wong. Common prefixes related to medicinal properties have single symbols, allowing rapid identification of plant categories. It's a writing system optimized for practical use by practitioners, not for literary expression or general communication. The discovery has profound implications for our understanding of how writing systems develop. Conventional wisdom held that new writing systems emerge primarily through evolution from existing systems or through contact between cultures with different writing traditions. The Voynich script suggests a third path, deliberate invention to serve specialized knowledge communities. This challenges our assumptions about literacy and script development in medieval Europe, Dr. Wong continues. We've always thought that writing was firmly controlled by religious and political authorities, with innovations coming from official channels. The idea that a marginalized group, women healers, could develop their own functional writing system suggests we've underestimated the intellectual autonomy of groups outside the power structure. Perhaps most exciting for linguists is how the Voynich discovery might help decode other mysterious texts that have resisted translation. The methodologies developed by Marković's team, combining computational analysis with historical context and content expertise, have already been applied to several other undeciphered scripts with promising early results. Marković's approach shows that successful decipherment requires more than just statistical pattern matching, explains computational linguist Dr. James Chen. You need to understand the cultural context that produced the text, the knowledge domains it addresses, and the community that used it. It's not just about the code, it's about the people behind the code. Beyond specific applications to other undeciphered texts, the Voynich breakthrough has reinvigorated the entire field of historical linguistics, attracting a new generation of researchers drawn to the possibility that other impossible linguistic puzzles might yield to similar interdisciplinary approaches. A decade ago, graduate students were told that pursuing undeciphered scripts was a career dead end, Dr. Chen recalls with a smile. Now our department has a waiting list of brilliant young researchers wanting to work on historical decipherment projects. Nothing motivates scientific progress like seeing someone solve a problem that everyone thought was impossible. The ripple effects of the Voynich decipherment have spread far beyond linguistics and history, catalyzing new collaborative research across disciplines that rarely interacted before. The manuscript has become a nexus where botanists compare notes with cryptographers, where art historians consult with gynecologists, and where medieval scholars find themselves in unexpected conversations with modern ethnobotanists. What's happening is nothing short of a methodological revolution, observes Dr. Rebecca Goldstein, Director of Interdisciplinary Research at Princeton University. The Voynich decipherment has shattered academic silos that have limited research for generations. We're seeing the emergence of entirely new fields at the intersection of traditional disciplines. One such emerging field is historical ethnobotany, the study of how historical communities categorized and utilized plant species, particularly those outside official pharmaceutical traditions. Botanists examining the Voynich illustrations have identified several plants that don't appear in official herbals but can be found in folk medicine traditions across Europe, suggesting a separate knowledge tradition that preserved information about medicinal plants ignored by university-trained physicians. We're finding plants in the Voynich manuscript that were dismissed as peasant remedies by official medicine, but are now being studied by pharmaceutical researchers for potentially valuable compounds, explains botanist Dr. Marcus Williams. These women weren't just preserving knowledge, they were documenting effective treatments that official medicine overlooked or dismissed because they came from women's traditions. In several cases, plants depicted in the Voynich manuscript that had puzzled researchers for decades have been identified as species that were common in medieval Europe, but have since become rare or locally extinct due to habitat loss. This has prompted collaborative research between botanists and climate historians, using the manuscript as evidence for historical plant distributions and environmental conditions. The astronomical sections of the manuscript have sparked equally innovative collaborations. Astronomers examining the celestial diagrams have identified star configurations that precisely match the night sky as it would have appeared in southern Europe during the early 15th century, suggesting that the manuscript's creators were making actual astronomical observations rather than simply copying traditional astrological diagrams. What's fascinating is that they were tracking celestial movements for practical purposes related to women's healthcare, not for the astrological purposes we assumed, notes Dr. Jennifer Hastings, an archaeoastronomer. They created a system that allowed accurate prediction of menstrual cycles and optimal fertility periods based on lunar phases, essentially a sophisticated natural family planning method centuries before such approaches were scientifically validated. This discovery has prompted collaboration between astronomers and medical historians to reconstruct how these women blended practical observation with inherited knowledge to create a functional healthcare system outside official channels. The result is a new appreciation for the sophistication of non-academic knowledge systems that operated alongside official science. Art historians have found equal reason for excitement in the manuscript's illustrations. Long dismissed as primitively executed by those expecting the naturalistic style that was becoming fashionable in 15th century Europe, the Voynich illustrations now appear to represent a deliberate diagrammatic approach that prioritized conveying medical information over aesthetic realism. These aren't failed attempts at realistic botanical illustrations, explains art historian Dr. Maria Rossi. They're sophisticated medical diagrams that emphasize the features most relevant to identification and medicinal use. The enlarged roots on certain plants highlight where the medicinal compounds are concentrated. The exaggerated colors indicate potency. What looked like incompetence to previous researchers now reveals itself as a specialized visual language for communicating practical knowledge. This realization has prompted art historians to re-examine other primitive medieval illustrations, particularly in documents associated with practical knowledge traditions, looking for similar functional rather than aesthetic purposes. Several previously dismissed manuscripts have been rediscovered as valuable records of practical visual communication systems. perhaps most surprisingly, the Voynich decipherment has influenced modern medical education. Several medical schools have developed courses examining the manuscript's depictions of reproductive health and childbirth, comparing its approaches with both historical and contemporary practice. What's striking to modern medical students is how patient-centered much of the Voynich healthcare appears to be, notes Dr. Elena Marković, who teaches medical history at Johns Hopkins University. While official medieval medicine was developing increasingly complex theoretical systems based on ancient texts, these women healers were focused on practical outcomes and patient comfort. There's a passage about positioning during childbirth that could have been written by a modern midwife advocating for natural birthing positions. Computer scientists who worked on the decipherment project have found applications for their methods far beyond medieval manuscripts. The machine learning algorithms developed to identify patterns in the Voynich text have been adapted to analyze other complex pattern recognition problems, from identifying subtle linguistic markers of cognitive decline in aging populations to detecting structural patterns in protein folding. The computational challenges of the Voynich project pushed us to develop entirely new approaches to pattern recognition in structured information systems, explains Dr. Rafael Menendez, who led the computational team. We had to create algorithms that could recognize meaningful patterns within enormous complexity without knowing in advance what patterns to look for. That's proven incredibly valuable across multiple scientific domains dealing with complex structured data. Perhaps most profoundly, the manuscript's decoding has forced a re-evaluation of how knowledge itself is categorized and valued. The manuscript reveals a sophisticated knowledge system that existed entirely outside the official institutions of learning, developed by practitioners who had no access to universities, yet created effective healthcare approaches based on observation and shared experience. We've long evaluated historical knowledge through the lens of institutional authority, reflects philosopher of science Dr. Eleanor Hartman. If it wasn't taught in universities or documented in monastery libraries, we assumed it wasn't sophisticated knowledge. The Voynich Manuscript compels us to recognize that some of the most practical and effective knowledge systems existed outside these institutions, preserved through alternative channels by communities ignored or actively suppressed by official history. This recognition has sparked a broader re-examination of other knowledge traditions that developed outside institutional contexts. Indigenous medical systems, craft knowledge passed through apprenticeship rather than texts, and oral traditions preserved through memory rather than writing. The manuscript has become a powerful symbol for the recovery of knowledge systems that operated in the shadows of official history. The Voynich Manuscript isn't just a solved puzzle, concludes Dr. Goldstein. It's a reminder that the history of human knowledge is far richer and more diverse than our institutional archives suggest. For every text preserved in our libraries, how many knowledge systems were lost because they belonged to communities who had no institutional power to preserve their wisdom for posterity? How many Voynich manuscripts never survived at all? Despite Dr. Marković's groundbreaking claims, the Voynich manuscript continues to guard many of its secrets. As morning light filters through the climate-controlled display case at Yale's Beinecke library, the manuscript's pages still whisper questions that remain unanswered. Most puzzling are the sections that resist even Dr. Marković's decoding methodology. Scattered throughout the manuscript, particularly in the astronomical section, are clusters of characters that follow different patterns from the rest of the text. These anomalous passages make up approximately 14% of the manuscript and appear to use the same character set, but arranged according to different rules. These sections feel like someone speaking the same language, but with a distinctly different dialect or technical vocabulary, explains Dr. Marković. It's as if a modern medical textbook suddenly included passages of advanced quantum physics. The alphabet is the same, but the organizing principles have shifted dramatically. The manuscript's final pages present perhaps the most tantalizing mystery of all. The last gathering contains what appears to be a series of 9 concentric circles filled with tiny stars, female figures, and unprecedented character combinations not seen elsewhere in the text. Dr. Marković's team has dubbed this the cosmological Rosetta, believing it might hold the key to the untranslated sections, if only they could understand its organizational principle. Equally baffling are certain plant illustrations that defy all attempts at identification. One striking example appears on folio 25 volts. A blue-flowered plant with impossible anatomy, roots that spiral in perfect mathematical ratios, leaves arranged in patterns that no known plant species follows, and flowers that combine features of entirely different botanical families. We've consulted botanists specializing in extinct medieval species, ethnobotanists working with indigenous plant knowledge, and even experts in medieval artistic symbolism, says Dr. Catherine Wilder-Smith, the project's lead botanical analyst. The consensus view is that these plants aren't merely inaccurately drawn natural species. They appear to be deliberate composites, perhaps representing prepared medicines rather than raw ingredients, the final product rather than its components. The manuscript's biological section continues to resist full interpretation. While Dr. Marković's team identified many illustrations as representing reproductive processes and women's medicine, certain recurring motifs remain obscure. Particularly mysterious are the star-shaped objects that appear at junction points in the flowing tube systems, sometimes depicted with what appear to be tiny faces embedded in their centers. These stellar nodes appear at consistent intervals in the biological diagrams, notes Dr. Marković. They correlate with specific character clusters in the text that translate roughly to celestial influence point or heaven-body connection. This suggests a conceptual framework that integrated astronomical and biological processes in ways that don't align with any documented medieval medical system. Perhaps most significant are the discrepancies between the manuscript's translated content and its physical construction. Microscopic analysis of the binding shows evidence of pages having been removed and the gathering sequence reorganized at least once in its early history. Certain text passages appear to reference information that should appear on preceding pages but doesn't exist in the current arrangement. The manuscript as we have it today may be incomplete, suggests codecologist Dr. Hendrik Janssen. Alternatively, it might be a compiled version of a larger knowledge corpus, selected and arranged for a specific reader or purpose. Either way, we are seeing only a fragment of a larger intellectual tradition. These persistent mysteries haven't discouraged researchers, quite the opposite. Each apparently solved portion of the manuscript has revealed new layers of questions, igniting fresh enthusiasm among scholars from disciplines that previously showed little interest in the document. What makes these remaining puzzles so fascinating is that they exist within a partially solved framework, explains Dr. Marković. It's like having most of a map decoded. Suddenly those remaining blank spaces become more intriguing, not less. We now have context for the mysteries, making them more approachable than when the entire manuscript was one massive question mark. The untranslated portions now represent the frontier of Voynich research, the places where breakthrough discoveries most likely await the next generation of scholars. Far from diminishing the manuscript's mystique, the partial decipherment has transformed it from an impenetrable enigma into an actively unfolding discovery, with each translated section illuminating the shadows around what remains unknown. The apparent breakthrough in deciphering parts of the Voynich manuscript hasn't silenced alternative explanations. In some ways, it has reinvigorated competing theories as scholars rush to reconcile Dr. Marković's findings with previously discarded hypotheses. The hoax theory, long a favourite among skeptics, has evolved rather than disappeared. Dr. Richard Whitfield of Cambridge University leads the most articulate opposition to Marković's interpretation. What we're seeing is not a hoax in the traditional sense of meaningless gibberish, he argues, but rather what I term a meaningful fabrication, a deliberately constructed system designed to appear like a natural language without actually being one. Whitfield points to statistical anomalies in the manuscript's text patterns, particularly the unusual regularity of certain character sequences, as evidence of artificial construction. Natural languages are messy, he explains. They show irregularities, exceptions, and evolutionary quirks. The Voynich text is almost too perfect in its patterns, like something designed by someone who understood linguistic principles but was creating rather than documenting a language. This refined hoax theory acknowledges the manuscript's internal consistency while questioning whether it represents an actual historical language. Whitfield suggests that a small community of educated women could indeed have created the manuscript, not to record genuine medical knowledge, but to produce a convincing simulacrum of secret wisdom that would enhance their status and authority. Consider the historical context, Whitfield challenges. In 15th century Europe, possessing a mysterious book of secrets offered social capital and protection. A community under threat might create such a document as a form of insurance, something that appeared valuable enough to protect its possessors without actually revealing anything that could be used against them. Cryptographic theories have also found new life. Dr. Sophia Chen, who previously worked with the NSA on historical ciphers, suggests that Dr. Marković may have identified patterns consistent with language without necessarily finding the correct language. What her team has discovered may be the structural framework of the encryption system rather than the content itself, Chen proposes. Chen's analysis focuses on the manuscript's key-like sequences, short character groups that appear at predictable intervals, particularly at the beginning of paragraphs and sections. These behave exactly like initialization vectors in modern cryptography, strings that reset the encryption parameters at strategic points. If this is indeed an encryption system, what Dr. Marković interprets as linguistic patterns might actually be artifacts of the encryption method. Alternative linguistic frameworks offer another competing perspective. Dr. Jamil Al-Farsi from Baghdad University has proposed that the manuscript represents not a proto-Romance language, but a form of encoded Arabic medical knowledge, transmitted through Romance-speaking intermediaries who lacked full understanding of the content. The statistical patterns Dr. Marković attributes to proto-Romance are equally consistent with certain Arabic medical texts translated into medieval Spanish, argues Al-Farsi. The frequent character repetitions, which her team interprets as grammatical features, could instead represent the transliteration challenges faced when adapting Arabic medical terminology into European languages. Al-Farsi's theory finds support in the manuscript's botanical illustrations, many of which resemble plants described in the Arabic pharmacological tradition, but drawn by artists unfamiliar with the actual species. What we're seeing could be the visual equivalent of a broken telephone game. Medical knowledge transmitted across cultural boundaries, with each transmission introducing new distortions. Perhaps most intriguing is the synthetic knowledge theory proposed by Dr. Elena Marković, a historian of science specializing in alternative knowledge systems. Her hypothesis accepts many of Dr. Marković's translations, but interprets them differently. The manuscript may indeed be written in a form of proto-Romance, Montgomery concedes, but I believe it represents not a documentation of existing practices, but a speculative construction of how the human body might work, a theoretical system created by individuals working outside the constraints of conventional medical education. Montgomery points to the manuscript's elaborate biological illustrations, with their impossible anatomical structures and fluid pathways. These don't represent misunderstandings of human anatomy, but rather deliberate theoretical constructs, an alternative conceptual framework for understanding health and disease developed by people who were free from the dogma of Galenic medicine. This interpretation frames the Voynich Manuscript not as a practical medical handbook, but as a remarkable example of independent theoretical thinking, a road not taken in the development of medical science that might contain insights overlooked by mainstream historical development. Each of these alternative theories acknowledges the substantial evidence Dr. Marković has assembled while offering different frameworks for interpreting that evidence. The debate has shifted from whether the manuscript contains meaningful patterns to what those patterns signify, a substantial evolution in the scholarly conversation. The mark of good science isn't immediate consensus, observes Dr. Marković herself. It's better questions. If my work has helped us ask more precise questions about this manuscript, that's progress regardless of whether my specific interpretations stand the test of time. The partial decipherment of the Voynich Manuscript hasn't closed a chapter in historical research. It has opened an entirely new book. As scholars digest Dr. Marković's findings, a remarkable cross-disciplinary ferment is emerging, with research pathways branching in unexpected directions. The most immediate priority is independent verification of the proposed translation system. 3 separate teams at Oxford University, the University of Barcelona, and Tokyo's Waseda University are currently reproducing Dr. Marković's methodology with important modifications. Each team is deliberately avoiding contact with the others until their analyses are complete, creating a true independent verification framework. We're not just testing whether Dr. Marković's specific translations are correct, explains Dr. Jonathan Hargreaves, who leads the Oxford team. We're testing whether any consistent translation system can be derived from first principles using her methodological framework. If 3 separate teams converge on similar results, that would powerfully validate the approach. Early reports suggest qualified support for Dr. Marković's core claims, though with significant differences in specific translations. The Barcelona team has reported success in reproducing the pattern recognition results, but has proposed an alternative linguistic framework based on Occitan, rather than a generalized proto-Romance language. Beyond verification efforts, the most exciting developments involve advanced imaging technologies being applied to the manuscript for the first time. Dr. Naomi Takashi from Japan's National Museum of Emerging Science and Innovation has pioneered a non-invasive multispectral imaging technique that can detect trace elements in medieval inks without damaging the original manuscript. "We're finding evidence of revisions that are invisible to the naked eye," Dr. Takashi reports. "Certain pages show earlier writing that was scraped away and overwritten, suggesting an editing process or perhaps a change in the manuscript's purpose during its creation." Even more revealing are the preliminary results from Dr. Takashi's elemental analysis of the inks. Different sections of the manuscript show distinctly different chemical signatures. The herbal section uses primarily iron gall ink with consistent composition, while the astronomical section contains unusual traces of copper and gold not found elsewhere. This suggests either multiple authors or a single workshop using different ink formulations for different types of content. This physical evidence has reinvigorated interest in the manuscript's production context. Art historian Dr. Isabella Fierro has launched a comprehensive comparison between the Voynich illustration techniques and documented women's artistic traditions from 15th century Europe. "We've been looking in the wrong places for parallels," argues Dr. Fierro. The manuscript's illustration style doesn't match the formal traditions taught in male-dominated workshops and monastic scriptoria. But when we examine textiles, domestic decorative arts, and the few surviving examples of women's devotional art from the period, we find striking similarities in composition techniques and motif arrangements. Computational approaches continue to evolve as well. Dr. Marcus Wong, a machine learning specialist who joined Dr. Marković's team in the project's final year, has developed an AI system specifically trained to detect meaningful patterns in untranslated sections of the manuscript. "We're using the successfully translated portions as training data," explains Dr. Wong. "The algorithm learns the relationship between text patterns and corresponding translations, then applies that learning to sections that have resisted conventional analysis. It's essentially learning to think like the manuscript's authors." Early results from Wong's system have identified what appears to be a recurring navigational framework within the text, structural markers that might serve as a cross-referencing system between different sections. "It's like discovering that a book has not just chapters, but an invisible index system embedded within the text itself," he explains. This suggests a document designed for non-linear reading, more like a reference work than a narrative text. Perhaps the most unexpected research direction comes from ethnobotanist Dr. Luisa Garcia Rodriguez, who has been conducting fieldwork in remote regions of southern Spain and Portugal, searching for living traces of the knowledge tradition that might have produced the manuscript. "Written texts aren't the only way knowledge survives," Dr. Garcia Rodriguez points out. "Traditional healing practices, particularly those associated with women's health, often persist in oral tradition for centuries after they disappear from formal documentation. We're identifying plant preparations used by traditional midwives that show remarkable similarities to remedies described in Dr. Marković's translated sections. This ethnobotanical approach has already yielded an intriguing discovery. In several mountain villages in northern Portugal, traditional healers continue to use a distinctive terminology for reproductive health that includes phrases strikingly similar to terms identified in the Voynich text. These communities have no knowledge of the manuscript itself, suggesting an unbroken oral tradition that might share origins with the written knowledge captured in the Voynich pages. The most ambitious future project, however, involves a form of experimental archaeology. Dr. Catherine Wildersmith is leading efforts to actually recreate some of the botanical preparations described in the translated sections, working with medicinal plant historians to identify the closest modern equivalents to the manuscript's ingredients. We're not testing these preparations on people, of course, she clarifies, but we can analyze their chemical properties and compare them with modern pharmaceuticals. Several of the manuscript's herbal combinations contain plants we now know have genuine medicinal properties. The particular combinations suggested in the text often demonstrate sophisticated understanding of how compounds interact. Initial laboratory analysis of one preparation, derived from a translated recipe associated with pain relief during childbirth, revealed significant anti-inflammatory and mild analgesic properties, suggesting the manuscript may indeed contain genuine medical knowledge that was effective within its historical context. As these diverse research streams converge, they're building something greater than just a translation of an old text. They're reconstructing an entire knowledge ecosystem that existed alongside but distinct from the better documented intellectual traditions of medieval Europe. What we're witnessing is the recovery of a lost voice from history, reflects Dr. Marković. Whether my specific translations prove entirely correct is almost secondary to the larger achievement. Recognizing that alternative knowledge systems existed, operated with their own internal logic, and preserved information that mainstream traditions either missed or suppressed. The Voynich Manuscript has transformed from an isolated curiosity into a window opening onto an unexplored landscape of medieval knowledge. Future research promises not just to complete the manuscript's translation, but to rewrite our understanding of how information circulated among communities that left few conventional historical traces. 600 years ago, someone created this remarkable document, perhaps never imagining it would one day be studied by people with technologies that would have seemed like magic to them, muses Dr. Hargreaves. 600 years from now, what will researchers understand about this manuscript that we can't yet see? That's the wonder of this ongoing story. We're just the current chapter in a narrative that spans centuries. As the manuscript continues to reveal its secrets page by page, character by character, it reminds us that the past is never truly gone, merely waiting for the right combination of technology, methodology, and imagination to bring its silenced voices back into conversation with the present. 600 years of silence, 6 centuries of some of humanity's most brilliant minds peering at these pages only to walk away baffled. And now a single voice claims to have heard what the manuscript has been whispering all along. Is Dr. Elena Marković's breakthrough the end of our longest-running intellectual mystery, or simply the latest chapter in a saga of false hopes? Standing in the grand hall of Yale University, surrounded by the manuscript's digitized pages projected on screens that tower above the audience, Dr. Richard Whitfield of Cambridge University, perhaps the world's most prominent Voynich skeptic, addresses a room divided by hope and doubt. Throughout history, we've witnessed dozens of claimed Voynich solutions wither under scrutiny, Whitfield begins, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent debunking false claims. What makes this one different is not the certainty of its conclusions, but the humility of its approach. This sentiment echoes through the academic community as Marković's decipherment theory completes its first year of intensive peer review. Unlike previous claims that crumbled within weeks, her proto-Romance language hypothesis has survived 12 months of rigorous examination, growing stronger through the very process designed to test it. The manuscript itself seems to be responding to Marković's gentle probing. Passages once thought random now reveal patterns that match documented medical practices. Plants once dismissed as fantasy now find counterparts in obscure folk remedies from Eastern European traditions. The pipe-like structures carrying bathing women now appear to be visual metaphors for the processes of conception and childbirth, exactly where we would expect to find them in a women's medical text. Yet the validation process has not been without controversy. 3 separate teams attempting to reproduce Marković's methods have produced translations with significant differences, particularly in the astronomical sections. Critics point to these discrepancies as evidence that the decipherment remains subjective, allowing researchers to see what they expect to find rather than what is truly there. This isn't an all-or-nothing proposition, explains Dr. Sarah Chen, a computational linguist who has spent the past year independently testing Marković's algorithms. We're not choosing between she's solved it completely and she's completely wrong. The evidence suggests something more nuanced, that she's identified the general nature of the manuscript and partially deciphered its system, even if specific translations remain debatable. The strongest evidence supporting Marković's claim comes not from linguistics, but from medical history. Dr. Mónica Álvarez, a specialist in medieval women's medicine at the University of Barcelona, found striking parallels between Marković's translations and recently discovered fragments of women's health texts from 15th century Catalonia. What convinced me wasn't just linguistic similarities, Álvarez explains, but the specific combinations of herbs and treatments that appear in both sources, combinations that weren't documented in the mainstream medical literature of the period, but that we now know were passed down through women's oral traditions. These aren't connections someone could fake or imagine without extraordinary luck. Perhaps the most compelling validation comes from a source Marković couldn't have anticipated. 3 months after her announcement, researchers at the Vatican Secret Archives uncovered a letter dated 1446 that referenced a book of women's remedies written in the special script of the Midwives' Guild of Milan. The letter mentioned distinctive features matching the Voynich Manuscript, including circular diagrams for tracking the moon's influence on the womb and illustrations of the waters of life carrying the unborn child. This unexpected historical corroboration lends significant weight to Marković's core thesis, that the manuscript represents a women's medical tradition documented in a specialized script designed to preserve professional secrets. Yet, significant questions remain. If Marković's decipherment is correct, why can't it translate the entire text with equal confidence? Why do some sections yield coherent readings while others remain stubbornly opaque? And why do certain plants and symbols still defy identification? Complete decipherment isn't a realistic standard, argues Dr. Thomas Nakamura, director of the Ancient Script Institute in Kyoto. Even with well-understood scripts like Linear B or Egyptian hieroglyphics, we still encounter passages that resist translation, specialized terminology, regional variations, scribal innovations. What matters is whether the decipherment provides a framework that makes progressive understanding possible. By that standard, Marković's work shows extraordinary promise. The ultimate validation may come not from debate, but from practical application. If the manuscript truly contains medical knowledge, does that knowledge have any demonstrable value? Early investigations suggest it might. Botanical researchers have identified 3 plant compounds mentioned in Marković's translations that show previously undocumented medicinal properties, one with surprising efficacy against antibiotic-resistant bacteria. 600 years ago, these women knew something we're only rediscovering now, marvels Dr. Elena Marković. That's not proof of my translation, but it's certainly provocative evidence that this manuscript contains genuine knowledge, not meaningless symbols. As peer review continues, the scholarly consensus has shifted from outright rejection to cautious engagement. The academic community now broadly accepts 3 of Marković's core claims: that the manuscript represents a coherent communication system rather than gibberish, that it focuses primarily on women's medical knowledge, and that it was created by practitioners operating outside mainstream academic traditions. The more specific claim, that the text represents a previously undocumented proto-Romance language, remains under intense scrutiny, with linguists divided on whether the evidence conclusively supports this identification. In science, we don't speak of proof but of evidence and its interpretation, Marković reminds her colleagues at the conclusion of a contentious debate at Oxford. The Voynich Manuscript has survived 6 centuries of silence. I don't expect it to reveal all its secrets in a single year. What matters is that we finally found a key that opens some of its doors, even if many rooms remain dark. The challenge now is to light more candles, not to close the doors we've managed to open. As the sun sets over Yale's Beinecke library, a young woman presses her face close to the display case housing the Voynich Manuscript. Unlike the scholars and cryptographers who preceded her, she doesn't see an unsolvable puzzle. She sees the voices of women like herself, reaching across centuries of silence. "It changes everything," whispers Sofia Diaz, a graduate student in medieval studies. "Not just what we know about the manuscript, but what we understand about knowledge transmission in European history. If Marković is right, we're not just decoding a book, we're recovering the lost intellectual traditions of women who found ways to preserve and share their wisdom despite extraordinary barriers." This sentiment reflects the manuscript's evolving legacy. For centuries, it represented the ultimate intellectual challenge, a Mount Everest for cryptographers and linguists. But Marković's work, whether ultimately proven correct in all details or not, has transformed how we view the manuscript. No longer just a puzzle to be solved, it has become a window into hidden histories, a testament to knowledge traditions that persisted outside the official channels of medieval scholarship. The Voynich Manuscript has always been a cultural mirror, reflecting the preoccupations of each generation that studies it. During the Cold War, it was approached as a cryptographic challenge, a code to be broken through brute computational force. In the Internet age, it became a collaborative puzzle, with amateur sleuths forming online communities to share theories and analyses. Now, in our era of rediscovering marginalized voices from history, the manuscript appears to be revealing itself as exactly that, the voice of practitioners whose knowledge was systematically excluded from official records. "The manuscript has never changed," observes Dr. James Chen, curator of medieval manuscripts at the British Library. "But our capacity to hear what it's saying evolves with each generation. Perhaps the manuscript wasn't waiting for better technology or smarter cryptographers. It was waiting for a world ready to recognize the value of knowledge preserved by women working outside traditional power structures." The manuscript's cultural impact extends far beyond academia. In the year since Marković's announcement, it has inspired a best-selling historical novel, a Netflix documentary series, and even a line of herbal remedies based on translations of its recipes. A Broadway musical titled The Green Bath dramatizes the story of the women believed to have created the manuscript, while art installations in major museums invite visitors to immerse themselves in its strange visual world. For cryptographers and puzzle enthusiasts, the manuscript's partial decipherment doesn't diminish its allure but transforms it. Rather than an impenetrable wall, it now represents a partially open door, with tantalizing glimpses of rooms still waiting to be explored. The most beautiful puzzles don't end with a single solution, reflects William Jung, a 19-year-old computer science prodigy who has developed new algorithms to test Marković's translations. They evolve into deeper questions. We've moved from "what does this say" to "why did they say it this way" and "what else were they saying that we still can't hear?" Perhaps the manuscript's greatest legacy lies not in the answers it provides, but in the questions it continues to generate. In an age of artificial intelligence and instant information, the Voynich Manuscript reminds us that human knowledge isn't a problem to be solved, but a conversation across time. Sometimes clear, sometimes muffled, but always beckoning us to listen more carefully. Standing before a gathering of young researchers, Dr. Elena Marković reflects on the journey that brought her to this point. "When I began this work 7 years ago, I thought I was pursuing a solution to history's most famous puzzle," she tells them. "I've come to understand that I was actually joining a 600-year conversation, one that includes not just the scholars who studied this manuscript, but the women who created it, preserving their knowledge in a form that would outlast the societies that marginalized their voices." As night falls and the Beinecke library's lights dim, the manuscript rests in its climate-controlled case, its pages neither fully revealed nor completely hidden. After 6 centuries, it has begun to speak again, not in a triumphant shout of complete revelation, but in whispered fragments that invite us to lean closer. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, Dr. Marković concludes. They're meant to be engaged with, to transform us through the very act of trying to understand them. The Voynich Manuscript has changed how we think about language, about history, about who creates and preserves knowledge. In the end, that may be a more valuable gift than any single translation could provide. The manuscript that once represented our inability to understand now symbolizes something more profound. Our perpetual journey toward understanding not just of ancient texts, but of ourselves and the countless voices that shaped our world, yet remained unheard. In its strange plants, mysterious women, and indecipherable text, we find a mirror that reflects not just medieval knowledge, but our own quest to recover the fullness of human wisdom, especially from those whose contributions history tried to erase.